How many goblins could a goblin gob if a goblin could gob goblins?
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. If you're looking for cards in the US, look no further as you can use the promo code MTGMudsta to get you 5% off anything on the site. Or if you're in Canada like me, you can use the same promo code at Multizone to get 10% off your orders of singles. If cards aren't what you're looking for, Original Magic Art has playmats, tokens, and sweet art that you can use that same promo code to help you get 5% off your order there. If you're looking to bling out your cards, using Alter Sleeves is a great way to do so, and you can click the affiliate link in my About section to help out the channel as you make an order. And if you just want to help out the channel, you can always consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month and join the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game is the pinnacle of EDH, since not only do we have 4 legendary creatures, we actually have 8. I am playing my Tymna and Vial Smasher deck, keeping Temple of Triumph, Sulphurous Springs, Tainted Field, a Plains, Byforce, Skullstorm, and Fumigate. Martin is playing his Ishai and Tana deck, keeping a Volcanic Island, Tome of Legends, Farseek, Scalding Tarn, Arcane Signet, Polluted Delta, and Blackblade Reforged. Max is playing Akroma and Sakashima, keeping a Spark Double, Endless Horizons, Luminarch Ascension, Mirran Crusader, 2 Islands, and a Myriad Landscape. Nick is brought back his Keskit and Nadier deck, keeping a Swamp, a Nykthos, Mycosynth Wellspring, Phyrexian Reclamation, Mimic Fat, Siphon Flesh, and Machias the Unhallowed. Nick wins the die roll and starts us off. Nick draws and plays a tap Bajuka Bog, exiling my non-existent graveyard. I play a tap Temple of Triumph, scrying 1 and bottoming it. Martin plays and cracks his Scalding Tarn, going to find a land. Max plays a tap Myriad Landscape. Nick plays a Swamp and casts a Mycosynth Wellspring and goes into his library to find a basic. I play Sulphurous Springs and pass. Martin plays a Plateau and casts Arcane Signet. Max just plays an Island. Nick plays a Swamp and casts a Mimic Fat. I play a Plains and then take 1 from the Springs to help cast Tymna. Martin plays Volcanic Island for turn and then casts a Farseek. He shortcuts before searching, putting out a Tome of the Legends and passing to Max. Max just plays an Island. Nick plays a Swamp and casts Keskit. He then drops a Phyrexian Reclamation and passes to me. I play an Isolated Chapel which comes in untapped and go up max with Tymna. I connect, gaining 2 life, and then lose 1 of it in my post-combat main phase to draw a card from her ability. I then pass and discard down to 7. At this point, Max also cracks his landscape to go and find 2 plains. Martin plays a Polluted Delta and then casts Lightning Greaves. He cracks the fetch, losing 1 to go and find a land, and then casts Tana, which gets a counter on the tome as she comes in, and he then gives her the Greaves. Moving to combat, he swings at me for 2. I take the hit, and Martin makes 2 tokens and then passes to Max. Max plays out an Endless Horizons and goes into his library to grab a few Plains cards to exile to it, and then passes to Nick. Nick plays a Temple of the False God as his land for turn, and casts his second commander, Nadier, passing to me. I play a Tainted Peak and go up max again. I gain 2 and then lose 1 in my post-combat main phase, drawing a card with Tymna. I then pass and discard down to 7. Martin plays an Ancient Tomb and casts 3 visits. He goes to find a Savannah and then goes to move the Greaves onto a token. He then casts Blackblade Reforged and pays to equip it onto Tana. The Greaves then come back and he goes at Nick. Nick decides to block with Nadier, and Nick this time gets some tokens as half of his commanders go to the graveyard. He still does take some damage though from Trample, and Martin gets that many tokens. Max puts a Prairie Stream to hand with his Horizons trigger and plays it. He casts Feldar Retreat and realizes he did this out of sequence, so we all say it's fine that he would have made a token otherwise. Nick then activates Keskit, sacrificing some tokens and artifacts to look at his top 3 cards. First though, he finds a Swamp from the Wellspring going to the graveyard, and then resolves Keskit's ability and puts 2 cards to hand and 1 to the graveyard. Nick untaps and draws. He plays a swamp for turn and casts a tapped Charcoal Diamond. We then see the other Wellspring, an Ichor Wellspring, hitting the field and drawing him a card as it enters. I draw and play a Dragonskull Summit. I cast by Force where X is 2 and blow up Martin's equipments. I then played an Exploration map and pass. Martin plays a land for turn and casts a Storm Surge Kraken. He then brings out Ishai, and with the other commander entering, puts a counter onto his tome and passes to Max. Max puts a Hollowed Fountain to hand, and then casts a Helm of the Host, which has Martin putting a counter on Ishai. He then plays the Fountain, taking 2 so it comes in untapped, and makes another cat token, and then passes turn. At the end of turn, Nick activates the Reclamation to put Nadier back to his hand from the graveyard and loses 2 life. Nick recasts Nadier in his main phase and plays out a Pen and Blade. He passes, and I crack my map to go and find an Urborg before starting my turn. I play Urborg as my land for turn and cast Smothering Tithe. Martin gets a counter on Ishai, and I then pass turn. Martin draws, and I get a treasure from the Tithe. He casts Phyrexian Metamorph, losing 2 life from paying the Phyrexian mana cost, plus 2 life from using his Ancient Tomb, and has it come in as a copy of the Pen and Blade as well. Moving to combat, he goes at Max with the Kraken, and Ishai goes at me. We both just take the hits, and he passes to Max. Max puts a Plains to hand from the Endless Horizons, and then brings out another cat token as he plays it. He then pays 6, casting Sun Titan, who enters and returns from his graveyard the Myriad Landscape. This gets him another retreat trigger, and he puts a +1/+1 counter onto all of his creatures. He passes, which has Nick activating Keskit. Nick draws a card because the Wellspring was sacrificed, and then looks at his top 3, keeping 2 and binning 1. Nick draws, and I get another treasure token. He plays Nykthos as his land for turn, and casts an Oblivion Stone. Ishai gets another counter, and Nick wastes no time activating the stone to wipe the board. With the stone's ability on the stack, Martin responds by casting Akroma's Will, and since he controls his commanders, is able to pick both modes, having all of his creatures gain Flying, Vigilance, Double Strike, Indestructible, Lifelink, and Protection from all colors until the end of turn. I float some mana from the treasures, and Martin removes a counter from the tome to draw a card. Nick then makes more tokens and Nadier dies once more, and passes back to me. I untap and draw. I cast Bolas' Citadel in my main phase and look at my top card and pass. Martin casts Anara, Wolved Familiar in his main phase, and he goes to combat. He swings the Kraken at Nick and 9 tokens at Max, while Tana and Ishai go at me. All of his opponents decide to just take their lumps, and Martin then makes 2 more tokens from Tana's trigger and passes to Max. Max draws and casts the Dusk Cask of Dusk to Dawn. This takes out most of Martin's creatures, and Max then passes turn. Nick draws and plays another swamp. He pays 3 mana for Ashnod's Altar, and then sacrifices a token to help pay for Nadier again. Nick then sacrifices 2 more tokens, which has Nadier gaining 2 +1/+1 counters, and Nick then plays out a Lash Wraith. This prompts a counterspell from Max, and with nothing else, Nick passes. I untap and draw, looking at my top card. I cast Cut off the top of my library, losing 2 but taking out Tana. I then cast Fumigate from hand, and with the spell in the stack, Nick sacrifices some tokens to make mana and puts more counters onto his commander. Nadier then dies to the board wipe, and I gain 10 life total from the board wipe, with Nick gaining back some of his tokens. I then play a Silent Clearing as my land drop, and pass to Martin. Martin draws and recasts Ishai in his main phase. We then see a Birds of Paradise, and he passes turn. Max casts a Mirran Crusader, and then a Luminarch Ascension, which has Ishai gaining +1/+1 counters each time. Max then plays a tapped Azorius Chancery, bouncing a land back to his hand as it comes in. Nick counts up his lands, and sacrifices 2 tokens to the altar to recast Nadier. Ishai gains another counter, and Nick then sacrifices more tokens once his commander's on the board to bring out Mikaeus the Unhallowed. Nick then sacrifices even more tokens to the altar, making some mana and adding counters to Nadier before casting a Siphon Flesh. Responding to this, Martin casts Path to Exile on Mikaeus. Nick then sacrifices Mikaeus to the altar instead of getting it exiled, and we each sacrifice a creature if we can, and Nick makes 2 zombie tokens. Ishai also gains more counters, and Nick then passes, and Max puts a counter onto his Ascension. I draw and look at my top card. I play a tapped Smoldering Marsh off the top, and lose 3 life to cast Bonus Round off the top of my library. I then lose 2 casting Torment of Hailfire, where X is 0, and Ishai keeps gaining more counters. I then pay 1 to sacrifice the Silent Clearing, drawing a card, and then looking at my top card with the Citadel ability. I then pass turn, but during my end step, Max capitalizes on the bonus round by casting Path to Exile. He gets a copy and exiles Nadier and Ishai, which has both Martin and Nick going to find a basic. I then pass, with Max getting a counter onto his Ascension. Martin plays a Mana Confluence as his land drop, and taps enough to recast Ishai. He passes, with Max getting a 3rd counter onto his Ascension. Max draws and plays a Plains. He pays enough in his main phase for Akroma and passes to Nick. Nick sacrifices a zombie in his main phase to the altar and recasts Nadier. With the commander on the stack, I fuse Wear and Tear together, blowing up the altar, and Max's nearly ascended Ascension. Before we resolve the stack though, Nick sacrifices another elf token to float 2 colorless. His commander then comes in, and uses that floating mana to help cast Curse of Disturbance onto Max. Nick then goes at Max with 2 tokens, which makes him a zombie token from the curse, and Max blocks 1, but takes 1, and Nick then moves to his 2nd main phase, casting Skull Clamp. Ishai gains more counters, and Nick then passes to me. I draw and play a Plains off the top of my library, and then cast Heartwarming Redemption, losing 4 life. This has me discarding my hand, and then drawing that many +1, and gaining 7. 2 mana then gets me a Mind Stone, and I then cast Night's Whisper, drawing 2 and losing 2. I then lose 4 to cast Past in Flames off the top of my library, and lose 2 more life, casting Conqueror's Flail off the top as well. I then flash back the Heartwarming Redemption, discarding 7 cards, then drawing 8 and gaining 8 life. Once more I check out my top card, and cast Twinning Staff off the top, losing 3. I then look at my top card, and cast an Orzhov Signet, losing 2, and then a Rakdos Charm, losing 2 more. I pick the mode to have it deal damage to each opponent based on how many creatures they have, and it resolves, and I then cast a Talisman off the top, taking 2 more. I tap 2 mana to cast from my hand Cathartic Reunion, discarding 2 lands and drawing 3. I look at my top card, and then decide to cast Night's Whisper with Flashback, losing 2 and drawing 2. Unfortunately for me, I haven't come into any mana generating spell, which leaves me with no choice but to pass, having unfortunately made Ishai insanely large. Martin draws, and moves to combat, taking me out. He then casts Tana in his post-combat main phase, and passes. Max then cracks his Myriad Landscape at the end of turn to go and find 2 islands and put them to field. Max casts Sakashima in his main phase, having the cloning commander come in as a copy of his Akroma. He then casts a Cackling counterpart cloning his copied commander, and continuing his cloning crusade, Max casts a Spark Double, having that also become a copy of Akroma. Max then moves to combat, and gets 4 Akroma triggers, with each one pumping each of his other creatures by +1/+1 5 times. This allows him to swing Akroma at Nick, taking him out with commander damage, and Max then passes. Martin draws for turn and casts Sakashima's Will. He takes one of Max's many Akromas. Knowing he won't survive the swing back though, Martin just passes back to Max. Max untaps and draws. He casts an Effeminate Mutineer and exiles his Akroma. He then uses Rapid Hybridization to take it to Ishai, and with the way clear for his flyers, goes in for the kill to win the game. Game review time. I think my favorite part of the game was when Max started going crazy with his clones once he resolved Sakashima. Having that many Chromas on the field, not to mention that many triggers per combat step, seemed like a really fun interaction. Martin's deck was also super sweet since it was based around the idea of having your commanders out and lieutenant cards, or cards that cared about your commander being out. He played a lot of those Sakashimas and Akroma's Wills. I was also really happy to see Nick bring back Keskit and Nadier since they had such a great showing their first time around. I knew I had to deal with Ashnod's Altar when he came out, and I'm glad that I did since it seemed to knock a lot of wind out of Nick's sails. I was getting desperate the turn before I got knocked out, as you could see. I was digging deep with the Bolas Citadel, not to mention card draw and wheels, and still could not find an Inner Fire or a Mana Geyser. It also made me realize that I need to have ways to put cards back on top of my library, since with the wheels, if I had it in my hand, I couldn't pay life to cast it, which was kind of unfortunate since I only had tapped lands for the most part near the end. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.